I need to get this out somewhere because I've been sitting on it for 6 days and the only people who'd understand are strangers. Quick background, and I'm keeping it short because the backstory isn't the point. What came after is, I'm 34. My sister Zoe is 37. We grew up in a house where our mom talked about Zoe's grades the way other people talk about weather, constantly and to anyone standing nearby. Zoe was the one who was going to make it. I was the one who was figuring it out. That framing got set when I was about 14 and it never, ever moved, not 1 inch, in 20 years. At 22, I took a job doing night cleaning at an office complex because I needed money, and it was there. I stayed because the guy who ran the building, Peter, actually talked to me like a person. He'd been running properties for 30 years, and he'd come in at 11 p.m. to check on a leak and end up explaining to me why the boiler was cycling wrong. That mattered more to me than it should have, probably. But nobody else in my life was explaining anything to me. Zoe married Cedric when I was 25. Cedric came from money, not huge money, but the kind where his parents paid for the wedding and made sure everyone knew it. He's the type who asks what you do for a living within 4 minutes of meeting you, and then rearranges his face when you answer. And here's the thing I want you to understand, because it took me years to figure out, and it's the whole engine of this. Cedric didn't hate me. Cedric needed me. Zoe married down financially. Her family, meaning us, was nothing. Cedric's parents were skeptical, so Cedric had to have a story where marrying Zoe was still an upgrade. And the story was, Zoe is the one who escaped. Look at her brother. Look what she came from. Look how far she rose. I was not a person at those dinners. I was a data point. I was the proof that Zoe was exceptional, and by extension that Cedric had chosen well, and every time somebody laughed at me, the math worked out in his favor. And Zoe let him. That's what I can't get past, and I want to be clear that I've never gotten past it. I'm not writing this from some healed place. I think about it in the shower, in my truck, at 2 a.m. Zoe didn't just let him. She improved on it. Cedric was crude about it. Zoe was surgical. The nickname started at Christmas when Lachlan was 4. I'd brought him a toy, some construction set thing, and he asked me why my hands were rough, and Zoe laughed and said something like, "Because Uncle cleans the trash, sweetie. He's the trash man." Everybody laughed. My mom laughed. I laughed too, because I was 26 and I still wanted to be at that table. It didn't stay a one-time joke. Zoe reinforced it. Over the next few years, it became Uncle Trashman in front of company, at birthdays, at my own mother's 60th. And when Carly got old enough, she picked it up too because that's what kids do. They repeat what the household says. Those kids weren't cruel. Those kids were 7 and 4. Zoe taught them that. And I said something. This is the part where people online always ask why I didn't say anything, so I did, repeatedly, for years. I pulled Zoe aside in her kitchen the Thanksgiving. Lachlan was 6 and told her it wasn't funny anymore and she needed to stop teaching her kids that my work made me less than. She told me I was being sensitive and that kids say what they hear. And if I didn't like what they heard, maybe I should give them something else to say. That was the sentence. Give them something else to say. Like my existence was a suggestion box she was rejecting. I tried Cedric once, at a barbecue, told him directly that the janitor bit was old. He told me nobody was making fun of me, that they were just being real, and that if I was embarrassed by my job, that was information I should sit with. He said it while holding a beer, completely relaxed, because he genuinely believed he was doing me a favor. That's the thing about Cedric. He isn't a cartoon villain. He thinks contempt is honesty. The visiting thing came later, and it was worse. When Lachlan was 8, I offered to watch the kids for a weekend so Zoe and Cedric could go away. Zoe told me no, and when I pushed, she finally said it plainly. She didn't want the kids getting comfortable with me because Lachlan was at an age where he was deciding what kind of man he wanted to be, and she wanted him modeling Cedric. She said I could see them at family events. Supervised, basically, my own nephew and niece, and I was on a visitation schedule set by my sister because she thought I was contagious. I stopped going to family events after Lachlan's 10th birthday. Not dramatically, I just stopped. My mom called it me being difficult. My dad, who has never intervened in anything in his life, told me to just take a joke and keep the peace. I told him I'd taken the joke for 9 years and it wasn't a joke. It was a job the family had given me, and he said I was overthinking it. So that's my family, in case you're wondering where the cavalry is. There isn't one. Here's where I need people to understand that I did not spend those years healing. I spent them working. I want to be honest about this because I think it's the part that makes me sound bad, and I don't care. Every single thing I did after that Thanksgiving, I did with them in mind. Peter offered to train me up into building management around when I was 27, and I said yes. Not because I had a dream, but because I could see exactly what the ceiling of janitor did to me at that table, and I wanted a different word. I got my certifications at night. I took the property management license exam at 29 and failed the first attempt and paid the fee and took it again. And I remember sitting in my truck in the testing center lot after I passed thinking about Cedric's face. Not about my future, about his face. I bought a small duplex at 30 with everything I had. Lived in one half, rented the other. Bought another at 32. Peter's outfit brought me on to run the day-to-day at a portfolio of buildings. And by last year, I was the property manager over 4 properties, including the exact office complex where I used to push a cart at midnight. I hire the cleaning crews now. I approve the vendor contracts. I sign the leases on the residential units in 2 of those buildings. I never told any of them. Not one word. My mom thinks I do maintenance stuff. Zoe thinks I still empty bins. Do you understand what I'm saying? I let them keep the version of me they wanted for 4 years, because a story like theirs only works if nobody updates it. And I wanted them holding it when it broke. People think that's psychotic. Maybe. But when someone builds their entire marriage's self-image out of your humiliation, and they teach it to children, and they do it for 9 years, you don't get to tell me what a normal amount of anger is. Now, last Thursday, I was going through the residential applications for the units in the mixed-use property on the west side. It's my building. I mean, I don't own it. But the leases come through me. I do the screening. I make the call. And there it was. Zoe's name. Her actual legal name. Cedric's name as co-applicant. Current address listed as Cedric's parents' house. Employment listed as 2 lines that did not include anything Cedric had ever bragged about at a single dinner. I sat there, and I read it maybe 8 times. I knew things had gone sideways for them, sort of. My mom had mentioned in a text back in the spring that Zoe and Cedric were between houses, which is the most mom sentence ever constructed. I hadn't asked. I had been informed, in that same text, that this was a hard season for them, and that I should reach out. I didn't reach out. I put the phone down and went back to work. But I did not know they were applying to live in a building I run. They don't know I run anything. They found the listing the way anyone finds a listing. And they applied. And their application landed on my desk like a gift I'd been waiting 9 years to open. And here's the part that's actually keeping me up. I pulled up the vendor file for that same property to check something unrelated. The nightly cleaning contract. The subcontractor list. And I recognized a name on it. I'm not going to say more about that yet because I need to be careful about what I do next and I'm still deciding. But I want you to know, I already know what I'm going to do. This isn't me asking whether I should be the bigger person. I stopped auditioning for that role somewhere around Lachlan's 8th birthday. I have not approved the application. I have not denied it. It's sitting in the pending queue and I have 30 days and every one of those days Zoe is going to be refreshing her phone. I did text my mom back, finally, on Saturday. I asked how Zoe was doing. Just that. Innocent, right? Concerned brother. And my mom wrote back 4 paragraphs. And in those 4 paragraphs, she told me things about Cedric's parents and their current living arrangement that I am now sitting on, and that Zoe would absolutely die if she knew I had. Zoe once told me to give her kids something else to say about me. I've spent 9 years building it. She's about to get her wish. Update 1. Okay. A lot of you told me to just deny the application and be done with it. And one guy said I was wasting leverage on a rental unit. And honestly, that guy was right, but not for the reason he thinks. I'm not wasting anything. Denying it takes 4 seconds and gives me nothing. I've waited 9 years. I'm not cashing it in for 4 seconds. Let me tell you what happened over the last 2 weeks because it got more complicated than I expected, and not in the direction I expected. First, the vendor thing I wouldn't talk about last time. I'll say it now. The nightly cleaning at the West Side property is subcontracted. We use a small outfit, and the owner of that outfit is a woman named Justine, who has been doing our buildings for about 5 years. She's good. She's also brutally practical, she runs on thin margins, and she does not do favors. I need you to hold on to that because Justine is going to matter, and I don't want anyone thinking she's some sidekick who's on my team. She isn't on anybody's team. The name I recognized on her crew roster was Cedric's. Cedric, my brother-in-law, the man who told me at a barbecue that if I was embarrassed by my job, that was information I should sit with, on a nightly cleaning roster, in a building I manage. I sat in my office and I read that roster the same way I read Zoe's application, over and over, like the letters were going to rearrange. And then I laughed, out loud, alone. And then I stopped laughing because I realized something that actually made me angrier, not less. He had no idea. He didn't take that job knowing it was mine. He took it because it was a job, which means the universe didn't hand me anything. It just put us in the same room and left the rest to me. So I did what any normal person does. I pulled the file. Turns out Justine's crew for that building had been short since spring, and she'd been onboarding new people. Cedric started in June. Part-time, nights, 3 shifts a week. And here's the detail that I have not been able to stop thinking about. On the roster, he's listed under his middle name and his mother's maiden name. Not a fake name, both are legally his. He just chose the combination nobody in our family would recognize. He built a version of himself that couldn't be traced back to Cedric, who married up. He was hiding it. From his parents, probably. From my mom, definitely. Maybe from Zoe. I genuinely don't know yet. And this is the part where I want to be honest about my own head, because a couple people in the comments seem to think I'm sitting here rubbing my hands together. I'm not calm about this. I read that roster, and the first thing I felt wasn't triumph. It was this hot, sick anger that he got to hide, that he got a choice about whether people knew, that he got to pick a name and step out of the story. I never got that. For 9 years, I was Uncle Trashman in front of children, and there was no maiden name I could hide behind. Okay. So, second thing. Remember my mom's 4 paragraphs? Let me tell you what was in them, because I've been chewing on it. Zoe and Cedric moved in with Cedric's parents in March. That's the between houses thing. But the reason is where it gets interesting. According to my mom, who gets everything from Zoe and therefore gets Zoe's version, Cedric's parents didn't just take them in, they took them in with conditions. His mother apparently has opinions about how Zoe runs the kids. Lachlan is 12 now and Carly's 9, and Cedric's mother has been correcting Zoe on everything from Lachlan's screen time to what they eat. In her house, at her table. Zoe has been living for 4 months inside exactly the dynamic she built for me. She's the one being reminded daily in front of her own kids that she's the one who came from nothing and should be grateful. Cedric's mother never wanted her. That's not new information to me. That's the original information. That's the whole reason the Uncle Trashman bit existed. Cedric needed a story where Zoe rose above her family. Now the story collapsed and Zoe is back to being what his mother always thought she was. And she can't even get out of the house because they can't get approved anywhere. Do you understand how good that is? And I hadn't done anything yet. Third thing, and this is the one that turned it from a fantasy into a plan. I got a text from Zoe. First contact in almost 2 years, and it came in on a Wednesday at 4:40 in the afternoon. And it was so obviously a test balloon that I almost respected it. She opened with a photo. Lachlan holding some certificate at school. No preamble. Then a message underneath. Something like, he asks about you sometimes. And then nothing for 6 minutes. And then, hope you're doing okay. Mom says you've got a place now. Mom says you've got a place now. I want everyone to sit with the fact that my sister's opening move, after 2 years of silence, was a real estate inquiry disguised as a child. She used her 12-year-old as a soft entry. The kid she wouldn't let me babysit because she didn't want him modeling me. That kid. Deployed. And I texted back. I did not ignore her. I want to be clear about that because a lot of people online think going silent is strength, and I think going silent is just leaving. I wrote back and I asked how the kids were. Plain. And she wrote back fast, like she'd been holding the phone. And we ended up going back and forth for about 40 minutes. She told me things were hard. She told me Cedric was regrouping. She told me his parents were being generous, but it was a lot of people in one house. And at no point, not once in 40 minutes, did she mention that they had applied for an apartment. At no point did she mention Cedric was working nights. She was building a picture for me, carefully, and the picture was, temporarily inconvenienced, still above you. So I asked her directly what Cedric was doing these days, and she said he was consulting. Consulting. He is pushing a cart through a lobby at 11 at night, and my sister typed the word consulting to me. And in that moment, I understood the entire architecture of her, because Zoe cannot say the true sentence. Not to me. Saying it out loud to me would end her. She would rather live in a house where her mother-in-law corrects her in front of her kids than say the words to her brother. So I pushed, gently. I said something like, "That's good. Hope it's steady work. Nights are rough on people." Just that. Nothing accusatory. She went quiet for 11 minutes. Then she wrote back that she didn't know what I meant. And then before I could answer, she wrote another one. Longer. And this one had teeth. She told me she knew I still held on to old stuff. She told me the janitor thing was years ago, and I'd made it my whole personality. She told me the kids barely remembered any of it, and that if I wanted to be in their lives, I could just be in their lives instead of keeping score. Instead of keeping score. I typed and deleted about 6 things. What I actually sent was, "You told me to give them something else to say. Do you remember saying that?" And she said no. She said she never said that. She said I remembered everything wrong because I wanted to be the victim. That she'd defended me plenty of times to Cedric, and I never knew because she did it privately. That Cedric was the one who was harsh and she was the one softening it. And I had spent years blaming the wrong person. That's her play. That's her whole play. She's going to be the secret ally who was on my side the entire time in rooms I wasn't in. Convenient, unverifiable, and it makes her the good guy retroactively. I told her I sat in her kitchen at Thanksgiving when Lachlan was 6 and she told me to my face I was sensitive. And she said she doesn't remember it that way. And then she said, and I'm going to type this exactly as I understood it. She said maybe I should think about why I remember every bad thing and none of the good. 40 minutes of conversation and she never once said, sorry. Not a soft one. Not a fake one. She spent 40 minutes explaining to me why my memory was the problem. Then, Friday, she asked me for money. Not directly. Zoe doesn't do directly. She sent a message about how they'd found a place. A decent place. West Side. And the application was taking forever, and the leasing office wasn't responding. And did I know anything about how that works since I do buildings? Since I do buildings. I asked which building. She told me. It's mine. And I asked, casual as anything, what the holdup was. And she said the income requirement was tight, and if they had a co-signer, it'd sail through. And then, immediately, before I could respond, she wrote, forget I said that. Forget I said that. She wanted to ask her brother, the janitor, to co-sign for her. She got right up to the edge of it, and then she couldn't, because asking would mean admitting I was above her on something. And Zoe would rather be homeless in her mother-in-law's guest room than let that sentence exist. That is the person we're dealing with. She's not dumb. She's not weak. She's just built entirely out of a status story, and she will burn every actual resource in her life to keep the story intact. So here's where I am. I've got Cedric working nights in my building under a name designed so nobody knows. I've got Zoe's application sitting in my pending queue with a note in the system that only I can see. I've got my mom texting me every few days now because she has decided this is a reconciliation. And she keeps saying things like, family is family, and this is your chance to be the bigger man. And I want to scream at her that she laughed. She was at the table. She laughed at Uncle Trashman for 9 years. But I'm not doing that yet because my mom is currently the best information source I have, and I'm not burning her down before I'm done with her. I know how that sounds. And there's a complication I didn't plan for. Justine called me Monday about renewing the cleaning contract for next year. Standard stuff. But she also mentioned in passing that she's restructuring crews across all 4 properties and asked if I had preferences on staffing. She asked me if I had preferences on staffing. She doesn't know Cedric is my brother-in-law. She doesn't know anything. She's just doing her job and asking her client a routine question, and the answer to that routine question could end Cedric's ability to make rent anywhere, ever. I have not answered her yet. The contract's up in 3 weeks. And on Tuesday, my mom let something slip in a text that I have not stopped thinking about since. She said Cedric's parents told Zoe they want them out by the end of September, and that Zoe cried about it, and that the West Side apartment is the only application they have in. The only one. Zoe told me to stop keeping score. I've got the scoreboard, the building, the contract, and 30 days. Update coming when I've decided how hard I want to do this. Update 2. So the comments on the last one were split about 80-20. 80% of you told me to let it ride. 20% told me I was becoming the thing I hate and that I should look at what I was doing to myself. To the 20%, I read your comments. I read all of them. And then I went and did it anyway, so, take the win where you can find it. Also, to whoever said, he's going to find out you're his boss the worst possible way, you have no idea how right you were, but not in the order you think. Let me back up. 3 things I had to sort out before I could do anything. The contract renewal with Justine, the application sitting in my queue, and my mother, who by this point was texting me daily like she'd been assigned to a project. Let's start with Justine, because that's where I almost made a mistake. I sat with her question for a week. Do I have preferences on staffing? And I want you all to understand exactly what was in my head, because I'm not going to pretend I'm noble here. My first instinct, sitting in my truck outside the property on a Thursday, was to tell her to cut the night crew at the West Building to 2 people and let attrition do the rest. Clean, deniable. Nobody would ever know it was aimed at anyone. And I didn't do it. Not because I grew as a person, because it was weak. Think about it. If Justine drops Cedric from a roster, Cedric goes and gets another cleaning job in 3 weeks at some other building, and the story in his head is that the work dried up, bad luck, tough market. He never has to learn anything. He gets to keep being a man who was temporarily doing something beneath him. That's not revenge. That's an inconvenience. Somebody in the comments called cutting subscriptions kindergarten revenge, and honestly, that's what firing him would have been, just a fancier version. I wanted him to keep the job. I wanted him under that fluorescent light for months, and I wanted him to know, eventually, exactly whose building it was. So I told Justine I had no staffing preferences and to run her cruise how she saw fit. And then I renewed her contract for another year, and I did something else. And this is the part where I need you to understand I'm not a saint and I'm not stupid either. I asked her to expand her scope. More frequency, more square footage, a bigger contract for her. She was thrilled. It's good business, the buildings need it, and I'd have made the same call if Cedric had never existed. But here's what it also did. It locked the crew in. Steady hours. Guaranteed nights. Justine went back and told her people they had a solid year ahead, which means Cedric now has a stable, reliable, boring job that pays his bills and gives him no reason to leave and no excuse for why he's still there in June. I paid money to keep my brother-in-law cleaning toilets. Out of the operating budget. Legitimately. It's genuinely the best thing for the property, and it also means he's not going anywhere, and both of those things are true at the same time, and I sleep fine. Now the application. Everybody said deny it. Everybody. And I get it. But think about what a denial does. A denial is a form letter. It's impersonal. Zoe reads it, says the leasing office is incompetent, blames the market, and applies somewhere else, and in her story she was rejected by a computer. She never has to hold anything. So I approved it. I want to be really clear about why, because this is the part I've thought about more than anything else in 9 years. Zoe and Cedric moving into a unit in a building I manage means their address, their lease, their renewal, their maintenance requests, their parking, their noise complaints, their entire domestic existence goes through a desk I sit behind. Not as some scheme. That's just what a lease is. That's what the relationship between a landlord and a tenant is. Every month forever, for as long as they live there, they are in a relationship with me where I am above them, structurally, permanently, in writing. And they signed it themselves. Voluntarily. Because they were desperate and it was the only application they had in. I approved it on a Monday and I did not put my name on anything. The correspondence goes out from the leasing office under the property's name. My assistant handles the paperwork. The lease is signed electronically. Zoe never saw my name once. She has no reason to look for it, because in Zoe's head, I empty bins for a living, and a person who empties bins does not sign leases. She texted my mom the day the approval came through, and my mom forwarded me the message, which is a whole other thing I'll get to. But Zoe wrote that it was a relief and that they'd gotten lucky and that the market finally broke their way. The market finally broke their way. That's my sister. 20 years of everything being either her merit or someone else's fault, and she cannot conceive of a universe where I'm a variable. Okay, my mother. This is the part that actually hurt, and I need to talk about it because I've been carrying it around all month. My mom decided, entirely on her own, with zero input from me, that my texting Zoe meant a reunion was happening. She started building it. She started sending me photos of the kids. She started saying things like, "Lachlan's so tall now, you wouldn't recognize him." And every message had this undertow of, "See, isn't this nice? Aren't you glad you stopped being difficult?" So I finally asked her. I did it over text because I wanted her to have to type the answer. I asked her if she remembered Christmas when Lachlan was 4. She said of course she did. It was a lovely Christmas. A lovely Christmas. So I told her. I told her what Zoe said. I told her about the nickname and that it ran for years and that she was at the table every single time. And that she laughed. I told her about my 60th birthday memory, hers, where Cedric did the bit in front of her friends and she laughed then too. And my mom went quiet for about 3 hours, and then she wrote me back the longest text she has ever sent me in her life. And it wasn't an apology. It was a defense. She told me Zoe had a hard road. She told me Cedric's family made Zoe feel small from day one, and that Zoe was fighting for her place in that family every single day, and that sometimes people punch sideways when they're being punched down on. She told me that Zoe needed somewhere to put it, and I was safe. I was safe. That was the word. My mother told me I was the safe place for my sister to put her humiliation. And then she told me the part that I'm still turning over. She said she laughed because if she hadn't, it would have gotten worse. She said Cedric's mother was watching Zoe at those dinners like a hawk, and if the family looked fractured, if Zoe's brother made a scene, Cedric's mother would have used it. So my mother laughed at me to protect Zoe's marriage. For 9 years, she sat there and laughed at her son to keep her daughter's mother-in-law satisfied. I asked her if she ever thought about what that cost me. She said, and I'm typing this as close to exact as I can remember, she said that I was strong and Zoe wasn't. That's it. That's the whole thing. 20 years explained in 6 words. I was strong, so I got nothing. Zoe wasn't, so she got everything, including me, as a resource. I didn't respond for 2 days. And then I called her, because I wasn't going to let this be a text conversation. And we talked for an hour and 11 minutes, and it was the worst hour of my adult life. She cried. She told me she wasn't a good mother, and then immediately told me she did her best, which are two different statements she made 40 seconds apart. She asked me what I wanted her to do now, like it's a chore list, like I could tell her the task, and she'd complete it and we'd be square. I told her I wanted her to say out loud that she chose Zoe, not that she failed. Not that she did her best, that she chose. And she wouldn't. She kept circling it. She'd get right up to it and then say something like, "It wasn't like that," or "You're making it sound worse than it was," and after the fourth or fifth loop I realized she is never going to say it. Because saying it means she was a person who did that, and she'd rather I be wrong forever. I ended the call by telling her I wasn't going to be at anything. No holidays, nothing. And she said, "Family is family." Same phrase. Third time this month. Then she said the thing that made me hang up. She said, "Zoe's really trying. She's reaching out. Why can't you meet her halfway?" Zoe's really trying. Zoe asked me about a leasing office. Now here's where it accelerated, and this is the part I actually need advice on, because I did something on impulse, and I'm not sure it was smart. They moved in on the last Saturday of September. I know because I have the move-in schedule. I approved the elevator reservations. I know what time their truck was in the loading zone, and I did not go. I want credit for that. I sat in my apartment 11 miles away and did not go watch. But Tuesday of the following week, I had a walkthrough at that property. Legitimate one, scheduled a month prior, third floor, a unit turnover inspection 2 doors down from theirs. And I'm standing in the hallway with my clipboard and my keys, and Zoe came out of her door. We looked at each other for about 4 seconds, and I watched her brain try to solve it. I watched her look at the keys on my belt and the clipboard and the polo with the property's logo on it, and I watched her land on the only answer her worldview allows. She smiled. She said, "Oh my gosh, do you work here? Do you work here?" Not, "Are you the manager?" Not, "What are you doing here? Do you work here?" She saw a man with keys in a building and her brain filled in janitor before the sentence finished, because that's the only slot I have in her head. And she was delighted because in her mind it meant her brother had a job nearby and everything was fine and normal and she was still above me. And I said yes. I said yes, I'm around here a lot. That's all I said. And she said something about how that was nice, how convenient. And then she said, "And this is real." She said maybe I could keep an eye on their place. Keep an eye on their place. I told her sure. And then I went and finished my walkthrough with my hands shaking. And I want to be honest, they were shaking because I was furious. Not because I was sad, because 9 years later, standing in a building I run, in a hallway I control, my sister's very first instinct was to give me a task. Cedric works nights. He hasn't seen me. He doesn't know I was in that hallway. The lease renewal notice goes out in 11 months, but that's not what I'm waiting on. Justine's expanded contract starts November 1st. There's a mandatory vendor orientation for all crew members working the expanded scope. Every cleaner in all 4 properties has to attend, in person, in the conference room on the ground floor of the West Building. The property manager runs that orientation. I've run it every year for 4 years. I'll let you know how it goes. Final update. November 1st was a Sunday, so the orientation ran Monday the 2nd, 9 a.m., ground floor conference room, West Building. Justine had 31 people on the expanded scope. 31 chairs, sign-in sheet by the door, the whole boring thing. I got there at 7:40. I want you to know that. I sat in that room by myself for an hour and 20 minutes with the lights half on because I could not be anywhere else. 9 years. I've thought about some version of this in my truck at red lights, at 2 a.m., brushing my teeth, and I could not sit still for it. People started coming in around 8:45. Justine was working the door with her clipboard, doing her thing. She's got a way of talking to her crews that's half drill sergeant, half ant. And I'm standing at the front pretending to fix the projector. Cedric came in at 8:56. He was wearing the gray work polo with Justine's company name on the chest. He had a lanyard. He'd lost weight. And he walked in scanning the room for a seat in the back the way you do when you don't want to be there. And he sat down, and he did not look at the front of the room once. Not one time. For 4 solid minutes, he looked at his phone. Justine started it. Standard. She thanked everyone, went over the scope expansion, said the client was expanding because they were happy with the work. And then she said the thing she says every year. She said, "And I'm going to introduce you to the property manager. He runs all 4 buildings. He's the one who signs off on everything. And honestly, he's the reason we've got this contract at all." And she said my name. I watched him. I have been waiting 9 years and I was not going to miss it. He looked up when he heard the name, and I saw him do the thing where your face doesn't move, but everything behind it reorganizes. He looked at me. Then he looked at Justine. Then he looked at the door. He didn't leave. Give him that. Cedric is not a coward. He's something else. He sat there for the entire 40-minute orientation while I stood at the front and explained key fob protocols and loading dock hours and what to do about biohazard on the third floor. And I did the whole thing normally because there was nothing to perform. The situation performed itself. And then, this is the part, at the end I did the section I do every year where I go around and get names for the roster reconciliation. Justine's list has legal names, my system has badge names. They never match. It's a genuine administrative headache. So I went person to person, and I got to him, and I said, "Name for the badge?" And he gave me the middle name and the maiden name, in front of 30 other people and Justine. He looked me in the eye and gave me the fake but legal name he built so nobody from our family would find him, and he gave it to the one person on earth who knew exactly what it was. I wrote it down. I said thanks. I moved to the next guy. That was it. That was the entire thing, no speech. And I need you to understand why that was so much worse for him than a speech, because a speech would have been a fight. And a fight is something you can lose with dignity. Instead, he had to go back to work that night, in my building. And every single shift, from now until whenever, he knows the badge on his chest says a name he made up to hide from me. And I approved it. Okay, so that was Monday. Wednesday, Zoe. She showed up at the management office on the ground floor. Not the leasing office, the management office, the one with my name on a plate on the door. And she stood in the doorway, and she'd clearly been up all night. And here's what I need everyone who told me she'd break to understand. She didn't break. Not even a little. Zoe walked in and went straight to war. She started with an accusation. She asked me how long I'd known. And I told her, since the application in July. And she actually said this. She said that was a violation, that I'd used private information, that she was going to talk to someone about it. I told her she applied to a building. I run the building. I read applications. That's the job. There's nothing to report. There's no rule against your brother having a career. So she pivoted. She said I set them up. She said I let them move in on purpose to humiliate them, that I could have said something in July, that I could have picked up the phone like a human being and said, "Hey, that's my building." And she's right, by the way. I could have. I told her that. I told her I could have and I chose not to, and she wanted that to be the gotcha. She wanted me to be ashamed of it, and when I just said, "Yeah, that's correct," she had nowhere to go with it. Then she went at the hallway. She brought up the walkthrough in September. She said I stood there and let her ask if I worked here, that I lied to her face. And I told her I said yes. I said, "I'm around here a lot." Every word was true. She's the one who filled in janitor. She did that herself in half a second, without being prompted, because that's the only slot I have in her head. That's not a lie I told her. That's a story she wrote 9 years ago and never updated. And that's when she got loud. She told me I'd been sitting on this like a spider. She told me a normal brother would have helped, that they were sleeping in Cedric's parents' house with 2 kids, and a brother with an actual property portfolio said nothing. And that I was the one who was cruel, that I'd been cruel this whole time and just found a way to be cruel with paperwork. I let her finish. And then I asked her the only question I've wanted to ask her since I was 26. I asked her why she taught them the name. And she tried to do the thing again, the memory thing. She started in on how I remember everything wrong, and I cut her off and I said, "No, we're not doing that today. You taught a 4-year-old to call me the trash man, and you kept it running until he was 10. Why?" And she told me. She said Cedric's mother never wanted her. She said from the engagement dinner onward she was auditioning. Every holiday, every visit. And Cedric's mother had this way of asking about her family that wasn't a question. She said she needed a story where she was the exception. She needed to be the one who got out. And you can't be the one who got out unless there's something to get out from. I asked her if she understood that she was saying I was a prop. She said I was fine. She said I had a job and my own place and I was fine. And she needed it more than I needed to be comfortable. And this is the sentence, this is the one I'll have for the rest of my life. She said, "You were never actually going to be anything, so what did it cost you? You were never actually going to be anything." And I said, "In a building I manage, in an office with my name on the door. I was 22. She started crying then. Not sorry crying. Losing crying. There's a difference, and if you've ever had a sibling like this, you know it instantly. And then she got up and made the ask. Still crying. She asked me not to touch the lease. She said the kids are enrolled in the school here. That Lachlan's 12 and has already moved twice this year. That Carly's 9 and finally has a friend on the block, and please, whatever this is between us, don't do it to them. And I want to be honest about this part because it's the only part I'm not proud of. I sat there and I thought about it. Not about the kids. About whether I could do it. Whether I could end the lease. And I can't. Legally, I can't. They signed a 12-month lease and they've paid on time and there's no cause, and even if there were, Peter would never sign off on evicting a paying tenant for family reasons, and I would never ask him to. So there was nothing to decide. But I let her sit there while I thought about it. And I'm not going to pretend that wasn't the point. Then I told her the truth, which was better than anything I could have made up. I told her nothing's happening to the lease. It renews or it doesn't based on the same criteria as everyone else's. Her rent goes to the same account. Her maintenance requests go into the same queue as Unit 214's. She's a tenant. That's it. And she said, so that's it? Like it was a reprieve. And I said, Zoe, that is it. You live in my building. Your husband cleans my floors. You're going to wake up in a unit I approved every day for as long as you can afford it. And I'm not going to do a single thing to you because I don't have to. This is just what your life is now. She stood there for a while, and then she said the last thing, and it was so perfectly her that I almost admired it. She said, Mom's right, you've made this your whole personality. And I said, you made it my whole personality when Lachlan was 4. She left. So, where it stands. Cedric works 3 nights a week in my building and hasn't spoken a word to me since the orientation. He passes me in the lobby. He does not look up. Justine renewed at the higher scope, which is genuinely good for the buildings and also means he's got steady hours through next fall, and I'm not doing anything about it because his boss thinks he's fine, and he is fine, and that's the point. He'll be there in June. My mom called 11 times over 4 days. On the last one I picked up, she wanted to know what I said to Zoe because Zoe told her I'd threatened her. I told her exactly what I said, word for word, and my mom listened to all of it, and then she asked me if I could just let it go for Christmas. For Christmas. That's what she took from it. I told her no. I told her I'd asked her one time to say out loud that she chose Zoe, and she wouldn't. And until that sentence exists, I'm not sitting at any table. She said family is family. 4th time. I said I know, and hung up. Lachlan texted me last week. 12 years old, got my number off my mom's phone, and he asked if I was really the guy who runs their building. I told him yes. He said that's cool. He asked if I could get them a parking spot closer to the door. 12 years old and already asking me for a favor. Not his fault. He's 12. That's the house he was raised in. That's what the house does. I told him to ask his mom to submit a request through the portal. That's where it is. No apology from anyone. My mother still won't say the sentence. Zoe still thinks I'm the cruel one, and honestly, she'll go to her grave believing it, because the alternative is that she's a woman who did that to her brother for 9 years, and that woman can't exist in her head. I don't feel better. Everyone said I'd feel better. I feel like I won, which is not the same thing. And I'd do it again tomorrow. Zoe told me to give her kids something else to say about me. They call me the property manager now.